And I see we have Director Beckett now on the line. Would you like to introduce yourself, Director Beckett?
Absolutely. And my apologies, a little technical glitch. Bob Beckett, Area A, Bamfield.
We're very happy to have you here today. Next on the agenda is petitions, delegations, and presentations. We have Mark Hunter, a resident, and he's going to be talking about electricity at Great Central Lake Dam. So please come on up, Mark. And just a reminder, we have a 10-minute maximum. But if you need a minute longer, that's okay. But if you're going to go quite a bit longer, we'll have to get it approved by the committee. So please go ahead. We're looking forward to your presentation today.
Okay, Mark. So in the past, I had an invention for brakes that truck drivers never needed to adjust, and it worked. And I was told I need a business plan, and you do all the runabout and you get nowhere. So, but anyways, the short of it was Willie Salisbury. We had it mounted on one of his trailers, and he said, "Let me take it into the woods." I said, "No." The engineer, he put in print. He can be the worst nightmare. Anyways, 10 days later, Willie was killed. And then I thought, I went on to tinkering in my carport, and we asked. And my son and I, we took the little water wheel out in the woods and had some fun, sort of. It was a lot of work. I asked, we won't pick on Mike, the fire chief, if he could just run with a pump truck. He said, "No, you don't understand. They'll stall, and you'll go nowhere." And that seems to be true. So it's possible to go in the Franklin River, Sarita River, lots of creeks in between. And the Sarita River, I don't know if you guys are familiar, but anyways, I found some information that it takes millions of dollars to do what? And stall. And stopped by Roger Creek one time, and the state was taking pictures of the creek was raging. A man he was a retired highwayman. He said that needed to be fixed, and the work started in a couple months. Some projects can work quick and some can't. But anyways, on your webpage, it says that they're in reference to the Great Central Lake Dam. Surviving the disaster is everyone's business. So I'm making it some of mine. But with the water wheel, taking it to the next step, I went through Encounter BC to ask about getting a water license, and nobody's applied for a license for that area. And I sent her a picture, and she says to me, "No, you can't do that." And then she says, "I should work within my community. So you people are in my community. So what would be nice is to fix up the dam." It's currently on gravel bar, according to an engineer's opinion. And so that's why actually it's in danger. So build a new dam on solid rock. Doesn't take years, doesn't take months. And I would put my little water wheel and the generators and the power supply and whatnot right in behind the dam. And so I'm a little nervous. So anyways, the point is, are you people willing to go in on something like this?
Did you have any more, or are you ready for questions?
No. Oh,
Okay.
this.
Director Cote?
Thank you. Thank you, Mark, for coming in and bringing this forward. I would like to just clarify a bit of information. I sit on a SOMAS fish flow committee, which we're talking about the Great Central Lake Dam every 2 weeks. Yes. The thing is that we don't own the dam. Catalyst Paper owns the dam.
Yeah,
And there's regulations, so we don't have the jurisdiction to be able to come in and manage that. But I am continually asking for a water management plan for the regional district. So I don't believe that the regional district could ever afford to take on ownership of the dam, but the federal government could. And that's where I'm focusing my energies is to ask the federal government to come in and take over and to rebuild the dam, basically in the future. It's being managed now. It's just gone through another assessment and it was approved, so it's good for a while now. But I think that if you have any proposals or you should go to Catalyst would be my recommendation because they own the dam.
yeah, they don't own the water rights.
I'm not sure about that, so.
According to Front Counter BC.
Okay, we have Director Roth and then Director Sparrow. Go ahead, please, Director Roth.
Thank you for that, Mark. I'm understanding that you'd like to harness the power to create electricity at Great Central Lake. And I'm wondering if you've considered forming a partnership with BC Hydro and presenting your information, because that might be a way to develop your plan.
Yeah, I've tried. They say they're not into that. It's the same thing with Sarita. They don't. No.
I wonder what's getting in the way.
Well,
Mark, years ago.
yeah,
I know you've been doing this for a long time with this like low flow water studies and how to try and generate electricity in the small creeks. And you don't need a big dam. You want a small dam per se with a slow turnover to keep it going is your theory. I mean, right? Is that right?
more or less, yeah.
More or less. So that's good. Like I said, we don't own the dam. It's Catalyst and we don't have the water rights, but I think you might be on the right track. It's gonna find a partner to work with, and we don't even have any infrastructure we could actually utilize or use to do this with, unfortunately. I know Cherry Creek a few times looked at putting in Colton on theirs, but that's something else to look at. But I wish you well, but I know you're into this. It's your great hobby and your great desire to do so.
Okay. Thank you then.
Thank you. Please go ahead, Director Jack.
Thank you. So on the background for power generation and the difficulties with BC Hydro, the Sarita Power project that we had going with Huet was not seen as a very good project because of the way that BC Hydro changed their call to power. There's a minimum amount of capacity that the BC Hydro is looking for now, and it's smaller than the 5 megawatt project that we were able to put together. They're looking for projects upwards of like 40 megawatts, minimum 15, I believe. And so that means the BC Hydro isn't really responding to the micro hydro kind of aspect that's going on. So I'm not surprised that they didn't really give you the time of day. It really seems like BC Hydro is pretty behind the times when it comes to what we could be doing to generate power locally and distribute it across the entire grid. There are several issues surrounding power generation in the area, one of which is the overall capacity of the lines. So hooking into the distribution lines, it's already almost at capacity. So with Canoe Creek coming on, it's going to change how things go. One thing we might want to do is weigh in on having a conversation with the province in some way, shape, or form about actually investing in both line capacity and looking at the call for power and the agreements being offered for power by BC Hydro and the BC government. And it just, seems like it's a good time to do that because there's an election campaign going on. So interacting with the campaigns and speaking to the candidates locally would be something that's really important, especially since our candidate here is still the Minister of Energy, Mines, and whatever else. So somebody who should be knowledgeable about what's going on. I would suggest that you and whomever is interested in this sort of thing go to an all candidates meeting and ask that question because it's super important. I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Did you have any final comments, Mark? Or, okay. So I don't think we're able to help as much as you would like, but I hope you got some ideas and next steps that you can follow through with. Thank you so much for coming in. Really appreciate the conversation, bringing it to our attention. Thank you so much, Mark. Next on the agenda is the ECC proposed regulations reduction in the release of methane in the waste sector. Paulo, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everybody. The report that you have in front of you is to provide an update and advise the committee on proposed federal regulations regarding reduction and release of methane from landfills, specifically looking at smaller landfills. I'll just go through a quick background here, give some context, talk through impacts, and then we'll open it up for questions. So in summary, ECC is proposing new rules that require small to mid-sized landfills to reduce methane emissions by 50% by 2030 compared to earlier levels in 2019. And when we look at our landfill, both of our landfills, where we may be affected is the Alberni Valley Sort and Go Center. Key items to note is that the federal regulation, while it's still draft, has received consultation feedback from various local governments and landfill operators. Things to note is that because there are stricter limits than the existing provincial regulations on landfill gas, it may be that capital infrastructure will be needed to install landfill gas capture systems, whether it's an active system or something that is more passive. I'll flip down to the regulation table that I've shown here and talk a little bit on that. So what you see are three categories, and essentially what we're looking at is the existing BC Ministry of Environment landfill gas regulation. That's what we fall under, and we meet that regulation for landfill gas generation. For the federal regulation, what we're looking at is a much stricter limit, and what you're looking at is what's called waste in place is one of their categories. In other words, how much waste is buried off in the landfill. If you're above a certain threshold, you'll be impacted and fall under the regulation. The second piece of criteria that's unrelated to that, but looks at methane generation. And that looks at a threshold of 664 tons of methane generation per year from the landfill. And that is the second criteria. We currently fall above that. So when you look at this, this piece together, that we do not make both criteria, which means the regulation would affect us when it comes into effect. And so what we will also note here is our landfill gas methane has been slowly dropping off over the last 5 years. We reassess every 5 years under the provincial regs to see where we're at. And a big gain on that is the diversion of organics that's happened. This is the thing that board has gone forward with, and we continue to work on to continue to divert organics, cheaper option to reduce the methane generation within the landfill. There's still more to be done on that front. So I'll just poke on key impacts that we take away from this. Infrastructure requirements by 2029, if the regulation passes as is, we may need to install either an active or a passive gas capture system, whether you're using piping or something called biocover, where you can mix certain materials together for alternate cover. There may be opportunity to apply for exemption and offset credits, but it's early to say what those will actually look like and whether we would fall under the exemption or not. There are financial considerations complying with the new regulation when we talk to our counterparts for our landfill operators throughout the province. And with the province of BC, there are still costly implications with installing additional infrastructure and operation maintenance monitoring requirements that will happen on a yearly basis. And finally, there are considerations for operational adjustments as we've worked on various operational pieces to maintain compliance. There may be the requirement to hire additional staff or contractors to manage landfill gas system or secure additional funding for infrastructure upgrades. Our key takeaways, I'll just skipping right down, is we'd be looking at continuing to engage with Environment Canada, the province, to gather feedback. The province did gather feedback from all local government landfill operators, and that's all compiled in that attachment that you see down in the report. The takeaway is that the province has put that formal response back to the federal government to take some more time to review, take the input into account, and make some further modifications and feedback that information back to our group, including an option to extend timelines for landfills. We would be looking to, under these new regulations, to apply for exemptions and see what possibilities there are to essentially extend time so that we could get things into place. But there's a lot of uncertainty right now until we see what the final regs actually look like. So we're waiting to hear feedback from the federal government. That was a bit, but I'll stop there and open it up for questions.
Thank you. Dr. McClement.
Yeah, what exactly what exactly are you looking for if we accept this presented report? Like my questions, I guess, are that, and I noticed in each of the four sections, section 1, then it says 3 and 4. What happened to 2? I had something here. Anyway, it says maybe, might, likely. Is there anything that you need to help make those things a positive so we know exactly what we're looking at?
Thank you, Director. There's nothing specific that we need at this point. This is just to advise the committee of what may be coming down the line. We need some specifics back from the federal government. So I wanted to provide you this information to say that this may be coming down on the line. I understand there's a lot of may and likely, but there are some unknowns where the federal government will be going with this regulation. So we don't have enough of that information to provide that back to you yet.
So should this also be part of something we talk to the people campaigning for our vote? I mean, this is an expensive thing, and an awful lot of things have been dumped onto their municipalities and regional districts over the past decade or two. And it looks to me like they don't really know what they want, unless I'm misreading this, and things could be getting real expensive if we're not careful.
I'll start, and I think someone else had a question in there. But yeah, and you're right. There's a risk of that expense coming out there. What they ultimately want is to reduce methane emissions from landfills. That's the goal. And there are various ways to do that, whether you're installing systems like some of the larger landfills that we know of, say in Vancouver, Nanaimo, other places like that, or where a lot of landfills are working towards their diverting organics to avoid that methane emission content. But either way, the goal is still to reduce methane emissions coming from landfills.
Thank you, Dr. Jack.
Yeah, so just a question and then a comment that depends on it, but I'll say it out loud. So these are regulations that have to do with the federal government, correct? And if so, would it be beneficial for us to interact with not only our MP, but actually send letters to the relevant agencies or ministries on this to see if they can foreshadow any of the regulations as they may come down? Thanks.
Thank you, Director. Yes, absolutely. That would be valuable input. The more voices, the better.
Dr. Sparrow.
Thank you. So you're talking about methane gases and you're focusing on diversion of organics. So the only creator of methane gas in the landfill, that the biggest creator?
Thank you, Director. That's that is the primarily the biggest creator. Anything with organics, any what you call putrescible waste as it breaks down in an airless environment, in other words, inside the landfill, that's where you get your methane. Which is why we divert as much as possible. When you switch over to compost, it becomes an aerated system, and that gets away from the methane generation. You won't create it in that environment.
Okay.
Thank you. There was mention about landfills that are older than, I don't know, 10 years or something like that. Will those be taken into consideration, do you think, or does the methane disintegrate or evaporate from those old landfills, or is that going to be an issue coming forward, do you think?
Thank you, Director Cote. The all landfills are being considered, including closed landfills. So it is going back to historical waste. And and not to go too far into the weeds, but when you have older waste, there's still a bit of a methane content, but it slowly drops off as the waste ages and breaks down over time. The piece that we attack, if you will, is any of the fresh waste going in. We head that off and divert as much of that organics as possible to avoid creating new material that's going to create more methane. But consideration for all of those landfills, older waste, that's been incorporated because they treat each landfill as a whole. As a whole, how much methane is being generated, old and new waste.
Thank you. So it seems to me that if you have to start disturbing the old landfills to collect the methane, it would create more methane. It would be opening it up. I know that I'm thinking about the fiber mat that's in front of the pulp mill and how they don't want to disturb that because it would create higher levels of pollution or whatever. So I'm just thinking that may be similar to a landfill. If you start disturbing it, it would be activating it again. So I'm hoping that we don't have to do anything with our old cells in our landfill that would start raising that methane level again. So yeah, it seems strange to be, down this road where the federal government had set a level and now they're taking that back to half, which there must be a reason. Thanks.
I do have a question. Right now, the new regulations, the threshold for methane generation is 664 tons. And we're at 860 tons. So if we got that down to the new threshold, would that alleviate our requirement to put in a gas capture system?
So prelim, that's what they're saying. If we can get it down below that point, we would have to prove it. There would still be some operational requirements to have a third party qualified go and analyze and all that sort of thing. But yes, that's one of the pieces in place there. We just have to show it and prove it.
Do you have suggestions on how we can reach that threshold? Or is that too early in the game right now?
Thank you, Chair. The biggest way to do it is actually the path that we're on right now. And we'll talk a little bit with respect to solid waste management plan when we get into that as well. But diverting organics, that's like when you're looking at the source, that's what you're trying to do. We started with single family residential. We'll look at some other things and we can talk about that later, but diverting organics is the biggest piece. And then we look at what's left and how we address cover to some of the questions that Director Cote had raised.
Thank you. Director Sparrow, then Director Jack.
Well, thank you for that. I'm reading through here and it says complying with regulations will be costly. Any idea what the ballpark costly would be?
It's too early to say. Similar sites can range in capital costs. And it could be anywhere from $500,000 or more to install something for capital, and then there's an unknown quantity for regular operation maintenance and monitoring on an annual basis. That's with some other sites. We would have to find out specifically what our cost would be in our locale. So I couldn't give you a specific cost at this time.
Thank you, Director Jack.
So it does seem like it would be in our interest to interact with the federal government and the opposition parties on this. I'm thinking one specific opposition party, just to see what where the policy could go on getting an exemption, and to kind of roll that forward as much as we can and figure out what it would cost to actually do like more than a ballpark, but get more. I can't remember which way it goes up, but class A to class D, whatever's more detailed. The more detail we can get, the better, I think, notwithstanding how construction goes. The other thing I think we might want to do is, I will bet now that regardless of who's in power in a year and a bit, asking for an exemption, we probably want to provide some information on the progress that we've made based on some baseline, like probably several years ago or something like that. So if there's a way that we can measure that progress across the entire region, or at least for the Alberni Valley, that would be very beneficial, because if we can show that we're making progress, that will probably help us get not only an extension, but maybe even some considerations on a longer extension if we're working on something more permanent. Yeah, I think that's the only thing I can think on, but because it's federal in nature, we should be able to keep it rolling and have conversations about it now, at least send letters or something, which is something I may recommend that the board do.
I saw Paulo busy making notes, but do we need a motion for that, Heather, to write letters to the federal government?
That would be helpful, yes.
So I'll say that.
Yeah,
Is it
I'll
a
move
motion?
that.
Okay, and I'll second that motion. Any more discussion? Director McClellan?
Does this motion give us the permission to do what Director Jack has just said and communicate with the federal parties and our MP, et cetera, to find out if we can get out of this, because or the feds pay for it? If it doesn't, then I'd like to make an amendment to add that to it.
I think it was just a recommendation to write letters to federal government, correct? Yeah. Oh, sorry.
I'd love to add that. I'd love to add that to it, although it's up to the board, so we have to make a recommendation. Luckily, one on the paper. Thank you.
Do you want to change your motion then?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd like to retract my motion and then restate it with Jack's, Director McClellan's. Thank you. Oh, this is so much better. Director McClellan's additions.
Okay. Have you got that, Heather? Okay.
You got that?
Does everyone understand the motion? Do you want to read it out, Heather?
No, I can't read it out. I was gonna go back and listen to the recording unless Jack wants to say it again for me.
Go ahead.
So I would recommend that the AVB committee, or sorry, I would move that the AVB committee recommends that the ACRD board communicates in the form of a letter to all relevant ministries and RMP in regards to the situation. NCC to SHOT, I think that would make sense, and who patches it, as well as authorize the chair and vice chair to interact with not only the MP, but potential government representatives from the federal government and the opposition parties on this matter. Is that good enough? Yeah.
Director
I'll
McClellan,
second that if that's a real live motion.
thank you. Very detailed motion. Thank you for that, Director Jack. Any other questions or comments? All in favor of the motion? Any opposed? Motion carried. And we do have a motion to accept the report. Would anyone like to make that motion, Director Cote? Seconded by Director Coots. So move that the Alberni Valley and Bamfield Services Committee receive the report regarding proposed methane emissions, reduction, federal regulation, and potential impacts to the ACRD and landfill operations as presented. Any further comments or questions? All in favor of the motion? Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you very much. Next is a solid waste management plan update and public engagement plan. Please go ahead, Paula.
Thank you, Chair, everyone. This is going to be a fair bit, so just bear with me here. As you know, we brought forward the solid waste management plan update, status and public engagement plan to board a couple weeks ago. Had some good input back, and we spoke with the electoral area directors committee yesterday on this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through just briefly the background, and what we've also added as a context is we've taken some of the feedback we've heard and adopted that into an updated backgrounder, which we've sent out to the members there. So you should have a copy of that. We'll be bouncing back and forth between that, and then I'm going to shift back to engagement and talk briefly about that. Okay. So going back on this, we reviewed the plan update, obviously, the other week, and some of the key feedback pieces we talked about are the draft strategies. And you know, the concept there that the draft strategies are things that were proposed options that we'll be bringing out to the public to share, have discussion with, and we know that we're going to have some feedback on those that will likely alter some of those, depending on what we hear back on, you know, our primary targets. I will shift forward. Just bear with me. As a key background, it is a Ministry of Environment process that we run. All local governments run it to renew their solid waste management plans every 10 years. As a requirement, we've moved through the process of initiating the plan process, which was step 1, setting the plan direction, and then now we're in step 3 of evaluating those options and building up towards engagement. Our goals that we've landed upon through a lot of work with our solid waste project coordinator, Jody Frank, and the team, the solid waste plan advisory committee. We've landed on these key inputs, which are, you know, achieving social equity and local economy. So ensuring that things are equitable, accessible for solid waste systems for everybody around the region. Ensuring environmental impacts are taken into account to minimize those things to local ecosystems. Pushing forward with effective education, building upon what we started and moving that outwards into all of the regions. And economic responsibility, making sure that we have financially responsible decisions regarding waste reduction. Those are our key goals. What informs those actual pieces are targets. The ACRD, as we know, aims to take care of people and the land by using resources wisely. One of the measurable targets is aligned with the province's target of 350 kilograms per capita. That is the amount of waste per person that goes into landfill. As a context, we're up around the regionally, we're up a little over the 540 mark. So we've come down a fair bit. We still have a fair ways to go. And we've set this as a target to achieve over the next 10 years and use the different strategies that we'll talk about shortly to get to that point. Evaluation of the options. As we talked about, we worked hard with the committee and took the input from the initial public engagement we did back in early May, and excuse me, and worked on potential strategies, financial and administrative impacts, which are underway, and looking at how we'll consult the public on strategy options. So I'm going to pause and I'm going to switch over to the backgrounder, and I'm going to go briefly through that. Bear with me. Again, we have our key principles that we focus on, and I apologize if I mispronounce this. ISAC, utmost respect. Waathlek, taking care of. And Ishuk Isawak, everything is one. And I saw a thumbs up, thank you. Much appreciated. So yeah, moving forward, we got our focused pieces that we heard from phase 1 engagement, and that's what informed a lot of the work that we've done to date, which is, you know, pushing the effectiveness on waste reduction, cost to residents, and, you know, achieving a good degree of waste diversion. With the waste management strategies, I will briefly go through them. As you've noticed, we have modified the language a little bit and adjusted the structure a little bit as well. And so I'll briefly go over those and we'll pop out, talk to engagement. So we've got 8 strategies. The foundational strategy number 1 is our education behavior change program. This is something that, we looked at it, we saw was less a singular strategy and something more that is an overarching strategy that covers everything that we're going to be talking with folks about. And that works on building actually upon the education plan that we have, building out that strategy and implementing waste reduction and diversion education systems out throughout the region. The second one focuses on establishing and expanding resource recovery centers and eco depots. So it breaks down further into West Coast infrastructure, establishing new services to provide for more waste diversion, handling, those kinds of things. Expanding on what's already been built on with the Alberni Valley Infrastructure and Services. That's the Sort and Go Center. That's the 3rd Avenue Depot. Expanding our rural, our remote areas, such as Bamfield and Salmon Beach are kind of the key ones for infrastructure and services. There's a transfer station model that started off in there, something to build off of for localized population. And then as well, supporting Indigenous eco depots, as we've seen examples such as the recent transfer stations that were open in Tlaopiat with the assistance of the Indigenous Zero Waste Technical Advisory Group, ISWATAG. Supporting those depot pieces with educational information, best practices, those kinds of things, and looking for some kind of options for them as well. These would be places that they would be operating, but we can provide some expertise on that. Number 3, development of business and organizational zero waste program. So that's developing and implementing policy tools to minimize waste and diversion, creating educational materials and business recognition and engagement events, initiating training and mentoring support for businesses and organizations, enhancing that, thinking of examples such as the work that Surfriders down on the West Coast with a lot of the ocean-friendly businesses, conducting waste audits and how to do, what to do, those kinds of things. Providing zero waste innovation grants. So those businesses and groups that want to create a zero waste function or waste event, some new ideas, and expanding on civic waste minimization, diversion initiatives to lead by example. You may have seen around the boardroom, we have our waste sorting bins that have been set up around here. The idea would be to expand that outward into other civic facilities, public facing areas. Number 4 is organics management, relates heavily to what we just talked about with respect to landfill gas. And so the idea is to build upon what we have for organics management. So looking at establishing organics diversion in Bamfield and Salmon Beach, and asking about options for expanding Indigenous organics management, whether you're in local adjacent communities or out in the remote communities. Number 5 is our multi-stream diversion program, and this is the one that we heard a lot about during the last board meeting, and we spoke a great deal about at the EA meeting yesterday. The focus here is, again, diversion. It sounds repetitive, but that is one of the key goals. And expanding rural single-family diversion opportunities, and that looks at going out and finding out what those other options are. That people like to see, that sizes for the community, rural areas. There are approximately 20+% of single families that don't have access to, whether it is either 3-stream or is a local depot. They just don't have access to those things. Typically, it's a mix of private subscription. In one case of, say, Beaver Creek, for example, there is access to curbside recycling, and that's about it. Other than that, you're bringing everything into the local depot. So asking about those options and getting that collective wisdom back to the table. Developing multi-family recycling and composting collection. Those are your apartments and so forth. Public space, so your green spaces, multi-stream recycling options, and talking about those to harmonize what you see in similar sorts of things as 3-stream, the same colors, the green for organics, the blue for recycling. The idea is you're coming into the area, where the different items will go, and to ideally simplify collection and diversion. And then supporting zero waste events, putting together toolkits for how you can go and manage a public event. Last three strategies. Number 6 focuses on construction demolition. So looking at building design, resource smart building design, deconstruction, and home relocation. One of the examples that is in the back of our mind, obviously, is the recent work on the SOMAS deconstruction. That is an example of a lot of material being deconstructed and reused, resold for other purposes, as opposed to showing up at the landfill. And supporting policy for construction demolition management for on-site construction. Options for expanding infrastructure and C&D materials management. So looking at source separation and possibly our ACRD solid waste facilities or other areas. Strategy 7, expanding our other material and product end-of-life management. We talk a fair bit about product stewardship, so we know a lot of those things that are covered off by the producers for producer pay for putting in systems, but expanding outward to provide something for hazardous waste collection, those little materials that are in the back of your garage that never seem to have a home, right? Incentivize large item management, bulky item management. Enhancing EPR program access. We talked about a few of the stewardship programs in place and building on that because we have some systems in place that do work, expanding those options for folks. Developing disaster debris management plan through the Emergency Management Act. We know that that's something that will have to be addressed at some point. And deter illegal dumping and support ocean plastics management. The last strategy is finally the end of life, the ensuring proper residual management. So that is our landfills. And that is discussing, the development for long-term disposal options for the Alberni Valley. We know we're in discussions through our working group with SHOT and Forestry regarding the current 5-year lease that we have at the Alberni Valley Sort and Go Center, and working on the process on what 30 years look like. So discussing those options and seeing what will come out of it. And then completing landfill capital projects, which is, expansion on infrastructure and working on capital closure projects, as well as our leachate systems out in the West Coast landfill. So those are the strategies. I'm going to flip back quickly. We've got a bit on engagement. Just bear with me a moment. Speaking to engagement portion, and this leads back to some of the discussion we had the meeting yesterday. Time frame is set up that will be kicking off during the week of October 2nd. We're looking at October 7th to open up the engagement window to go online and start putting out all of those materials. And during the period of October 21st to now it's approximately November 12th or so, we would have our open houses and our community events. Combinations of items are the Alberni Valley open house meeting, Defino Legion, and Community Center. And we've actually updated our sample schedule here to include that. And we've also, bear with me, I've lost my spot. There we go. We also are promoting everything through Let's Connect.ca, Let's Connect ICRD.ca /swamp, print advertising, radio ads, utility bills, First Nation community newsletters that we work through with partners, press releases, social media tags, SD70 notices, and static displays at our various depots. And we've initiated some of those questions even at the most recent, the Alberni Valley Fall Fair, with our waste educators. We heard yesterday the need to expand some of that outreach, so we factored that in and are working through plans to include additional open houses, which will be out in the electoral areas. And one thing, and I apologize, I had forgotten about, we do have a list of First Nation communities that have expressed interest in meetings with Chief and Council, and those will be factored in as well. And we're just nailing down those schedules. That was a lot, so I'll stop and open it up for questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments? Director McClement?
Yeah, just same question. If we accept this, on the alter or the changes that you made, which I appreciate, explore options for single-family waste diversion in rural and remote communities. Changing that wording to that is a definite plus. Is there anywhere in here that if a area like Beaver Creek, Beaufort, Cherry Creek does not want to be involved in what the rest are going to do, that they can opt out and do their own?
Through you, Chair. There's not a specific option for that. We'll be gathering input. We want to know what we're hearing back. The result of that engagement, that's what's going to help inform that. If it looks like Beaver Creek doesn't want a specific thing, then that's great. But I do want to highlight again, and it's similar to the question we had yesterday, is, finding out what are those options, because one of the goals, and it does tie back into even the discussion we just had around methane and landfill gas, is we're all aligned that we want to divert waste. That's what we've heard loud and clear. We need to make sure that it's equitable, accessible, and it's also measurable as well. So if we're focusing on diverting waste, we're also focusing, part of that is diverting organics. And they're, depending on how the regulations come out, with the federal government, should the province do any changes as well, the fact is we may wind up at a point where we can't accept organics and recyclables within mixed loads at the landfill anymore. So knowing that, it'll be asking, okay, so what will help to actually divert those materials? Because we know at the end of the day, those materials have to be diverted somehow. I don't know if that helps your question, but
That'll be fine. There'll be a lot more discussion now as we get it. So we'll see how you make out. Good luck and thanks for the work you're doing.
Any other questions or comments? I'm just gonna make a comment. I'm not sure if you have those bins at public places of city, like City Hall, the multiplex, Echo Center, those kinds of places. I would love to see them there if they're not.
thank you, Chair. That's actually part of that strategy. So yeah, the hope is that we can expand that outward to those public facilities, and even on the West Coast, looking at Tofino, Ucluelet, those kinds of things. I did want to highlight, and going right back to it, that I did want to highlight a lot of the huge pile of work and the heavy lifting has been done, like not just by the solid waste team with Jody leading our project through here, but the solid waste management plan advisory committee has done a lot of work to take in the input so far and put everything together with where we're at today. So I just again, I want to do a huge shout out for the group, because it's been a lot. And yeah.
Absolutely. You guys do great work and hard work. So thank you so much for that. Director Sparrow, then Director Cote.
Well, thank you for that. I know they go through the process of trying to get the organics out. And is there any other places that have the rural areas decided not to do this? And I've heard of somewhere that you go to the landfill and say, I got recyclables, and they actually search the bags, they find organics in there, they charge them a higher rate because they're trying to scam the system. So have you heard of that? And is that something you look at in the future?
Thank you, Director Sparrow. Yeah, we have looked at that. That's one of those practices that landfill operators have done to more aggressively push that diversion piece. So what you're describing is source separation. So making sure those materials are actually out of there. So yeah, we've looked at some of those options. That could be one of the things that we put forward at the end of the day. A lot of it will come back out of engagement, and the result of that will be how we're able to ensure that those things are done.
Thank you, Director Cote.
Thank you. We've come a long ways, I think, from when we started, when there was people at the landfill separating garbage and looking at what was in there. Are we still doing that, or are we past that? And realizing that the city does a really good job with their diversion. But that's just for residential. So I own a multi-family building with commercial. And we don't have that option. I do have a dumpster that has recycling on one side and garbage on the other, but there's nothing for organics. So I think that, you know, that's quite a large population group that could make a measurable difference if we could get some kind of system going for that. So are we still checking for what's coming in? Thank you.
Through your chair. Thank you, Director Cote. A few things in there. So, yes, any of the landfill operations, we still have spotters in place. Spotters are required to go and check loads. We have scale cameras in place as well. They do their best to pull everything out if they can, if it's safe enough to do so on the edge. But the encouragement is residents pull out their materials. That's why we have the transfer stations up front. If there are materials that's showing up in the active phase, they're typically intermingled, like the example I think that you just talked about. So one of the strategies that we talked about, which I believe was 5, is dealing with multifamily, all of those pieces there. So looking at what those are going to look like. A lot of it will, we'll look at the haulers and, whether it's a larger bin system for some of those things where you do have your garbage, your recycling, and your organics. That would be one of the options I'd be looking at as far as that strategy is concerned. But again, part of the discussion during the engagement.
Thank you. So in my building, I have 2 restaurants. And I know that at least one of them had a contract or an agreement with one of the local farmers that would pick up any of the organic foods that weren't being, was garbage to feed animals and compost. So I'm wondering if that's something that we would be looking at, is to work with our agricultural community to work with those multi-family areas or restaurants. Thank you. Or stores for that matter.
Thank you. Yeah, again, that would be another one of those options that we'd be looking at as part, it's nested within the strategy in itself. We're keeping it high level because, again, those are some of the options we want to work on. And we know of some of the groups that are utilizing that material and diverting some of that already. What'll be cool is to be able to measure a lot of that material as well, right? So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Cote. I made myself a note to look at how we can expand recycling services to multi-family dwelling complexes, because we're getting more and more of those multi-family dwellings built within the city. So it's something that we really have to start looking at. So I'll also maybe ask staff to reach out to you and talk about how we can expand those services. Does that make sense?
Thank you, Chair. I think that's fair. And that'll be fleshed out too during the first open house, which will be on the 17th, I think. So, yeah.
Perfect. Always looking for new and different ways that we can do our jobs better. All right. Any other questions or comments? Oh, Director Roth, I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. I'm just curious to know, I haven't heard this before. What is an eco depot?
That's a great question. An eco depot is something that is essentially a one-stop drop when you're dropping off your waste materials. They come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes, but essentially you're able to come along and you may have something for garbage and there'll be an opportunity to drop off material there. But typically what we have is a series of recyclable options. You'll notice, and the big example that I'll have right now is Third Ave Depot. That would be an example of an eco depot. You're able to bring in over a dozen different types of things that go into different programs, whether you're talking about containers for Recycle BC, you're talking about electronics, batteries, there are all sorts of different programs. So there's a home for each of those materials. Some eco depots are quite huge and they'll have anywhere from 20 to 50 different diversion options when you go in. But the idea, if you can wrap your head around it, it's the one-stop drop. That's the best way to explain it. Ideally, if somebody's going to a place where they can drop everything off in the right spot, that's what it looks like.
Thank you. Any final questions or comments? We do have a motion. Would anybody like to make that? Dr. Sparrow? Yes, please. That would be great. Thank you.
Sorry. So this one here. So the Alberni Valley and Bamfield Services Committee received the report regarding the solid waste management plan update and public engagement plan as presented.
Moved by Director Sparrow, second by Director Cote. Any final questions or comments? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. Next is question period. We have nobody here. Is there any questions online, Heather?
So let me just check the email. There's nothing received in email and there's nothing in Zoom. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Motion to adjourn. Moved by Director Cote, second by Director McClellan. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. We'll see everybody back here at 1:30 for the regular board meeting. Bye for now.